My father slammed his fist on the Thanksgiving table, his face red with rage, and shouted in front of everyone, "You're the family disgrace." Then he pointed at the door and told me to get out. I stood there, my chest burning, but I smiled instead of crying. I didn't argue, didn't beg. I just said fine. What no one at that table knew was that for years they had been living off my $20 million fortune. And when I walked away that night, I knew the truth would eventually destroy them more than their words ever destroyed me. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening, or let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story touches you, please take a second to subscribe to this channel. It helps more than you know, and it means my voice won't be silenced the way my family tried to silence me. My name is Serafina Wadsworth, and this is the story of how I went from being their disgrace to being the one who held all the power. I live in a modest 3-bedroom home tucked into the quieter edges of Greenwich. It isn't much compared to the Sterling estate with its columns and endless lawns, but for me and my 5-year-old son Milo, it is a sanctuary. The walls are lined with his crayon drawings, the sofa a little sunken from the two of us curling up on it every evening. I often tell myself I don't need their world anymore yet. When the Thanksgiving email arrived, my chest still tightened. I always knew the Sterlings never truly considered me part of them, I admit to myself, but this year's invitation still managed to sting. It came from my sister Lila, cold efficient, dressed in bullet points. Arrival precisely at 6, black tie attire only. Children must remain in the recreation room. Seating assigned. I scrolled down the file until my eyes caught on it. Milo's name spelled wrong, Miles. My name pushed to the very end of the table as though I were an afterthought. The familiar ache welled up and I whispered under my breath, maybe this year will be different. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. That morning, Milo stood before the mirror, frowning at the little navy vest I had bought him. "Do I really have to wear this tie?" he asked, fumbling. I crouched and helped his tiny hands loop the knot. The tie wasn't just fabric, it was a shield. Sometimes dressing sharp helps people see how smart you already are, I told him. He beamed, satisfied. Later, we strolled to the park. Neighbors waved politely the way people do when they don't want to ask real questions. "Nice weather," one remarked. Not a word about work, as if tech support was all they thought I could amount to. I pretended not to care. Inside, though, I thought I'd rather be dismissed than accepted because of money. Money isn't the proof I'm looking for. Back home, my phone buzzed. Nora Vega, my right hand at Neuronest. We ran through the upcoming beta launch of our education software. "One more thing," I told her, lowering my voice, even though Milo was in the other room. "Don't ever let my family know I'm CEO. That secret doesn't belong at their table." After the call, I pulled out a thick envelope addressed to Aurelius Holdings, LLC. Another mortgage payment. Another invisible lifeline tossed to a family who insisted I was their burden. I slipped the receipt into the drawer and shut it quickly as if the wood could hide my shame. Memory rose unbidden. A dinner long ago, Walter, my father, slamming his fist and comparing me to Grayson and Lila. "Why can't you be like them? You're a disgrace, Zephyr." The words had burned themselves into me, and no success had erased the scar. That night, once Milo was asleep, I opened the seating plan file. His name, Miles, was scrawled under children's table. My heart pounded. I closed the laptop softly and whispered into the dark. "If they humiliate my boy this time, I won't explain. I'll just walk out." When I look back, the fracture started in 2019, my final year at MIT. My girlfriend had whispered she was pregnant. I remember standing in the sterile dorm hallway when she told me she couldn't do it, that someone had offered her support to move away and start fresh. She left, and she never came back. My parents offered solutions that didn't feel like choices: end the pregnancy or give the baby away. I chose Milo. In their eyes, that was the day I stained the family name beyond repair. Those first years' survival looked like a cramped apartment with peeling paint nights of Milo crying, while I typed lines of code with one arm and rocked him with the other. Every bug I fixed, every algorithm I improved wasn't just about money, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't broken. Proof that I was more than their disgrace. By 2020, Neuronest had grown into something real. By 2023, the company sold, leaving me with $20 million after taxes. That fortune could have been my declaration of worth, but instead I built walls around it. Aurelius Holdings, LLC, my invisible alter ego. Through it, I quietly wired payments no one ever traced back to me. I covered the mortgage when my father's investments tanked. I funneled capital into Grayson's real estate projects. I endowed scholarships that carried Ivy and Theo through private school. And still at family dinners, I was the punchline. Zephyr, the tech support guy. They lived off my hidden millions while laughing at the man who sent them. One late night, I stared at the spreadsheet Nora had sent. The numbers towered higher than I'd admitted to myself. The Sterling Empire was practically scaffolded on my secret contributions. My chest tightened with the realization I had been the one enabling them to despise me. If I stripped my money away, would their world even stand? A notification pinged. An attachment from Nora. My hand hovered as I opened it. It wasn't another invoice, it was an old contract from 2019. Scanned, faded, but legible. On the final page, a line in cold legal font, beneficiary W. Sterling. My vision blurred. Walter, my father. Somehow, someway, he had been part of that support that made my girlfriend vanish. The silence roared in my ears as if the whole world had stopped. I leaned back, the document trembling in my hands. For years, I thought she left because I wasn't enough. Now a darker truth loomed. Maybe she was paid to disappear. The shame that had followed me for half a decade twisted into something sharper. Fury, resolve. The man who had called me a disgrace might have orchestrated the very wound that defined me. I set the paper down, staring at Walter's name. My whisper filled the empty room. If this is true, then everything changes. The document Nora sent sat in my inbox like a ticking thing. I printed it because paper feels harder to deny. The first page was a relocation support agreement paired with a 10-year non-disclosure, both dated the fall of my last semester at MIT. Her name was there, my former girlfriend, alongside a neat signature I recognized from the lease we once signed together. The agreement laid out a stipend, moving costs, and a clause that might as well have been written in neon: no contact with me or any member of my family. On the final pages, the money trail appeared in sterile lines. Funds were routed through Hudson Ascot Partners, and then, with the efficiency of a private elevator, rose into the Sterling Family Trust. The language was cool, professional, nothing personal to hold on to, just enough to set my hands shaking. I followed each transfer like footholds across a canyon until there was nowhere left to step except the truth. I brought the pages to our company's attorney the next morning. He skimmed in silence, lips pressed thin, and then leaned back. "I've seen arrangements like this," he said. "When powerful families want to avoid headlines, they create distance. A partner pays for a quiet exit. The NDA ensures it stays quiet. So you're telling me," I asked, feeling the blood drain from my face, "my father bought her disappearance?" He didn't soften it. "Someone acting on behalf of your family did," he replied. "And whoever controlled that trust had intent." Intent. The word lived like a shard between my ribs. Leaving the office, I stood on the sidewalk, document folder sweating in my hands, watching December light knock itself to pieces on the windshields along the curb. For years I had carried the idea that she left because I wasn't enough, too poor, too uncertain, too unpolished. It had been a private humiliation that I simply folded into my spine. Now the humiliation belonged to someone else. I wasn't the man who failed. I was the man they pushed aside. I called my mother. I didn't ask outright. I laid the facts around us like furniture. I found something, I said, from 2019, a relocation agreement. The funds passed through Hudson Ascot Partners and then to the family trust. There was a pause that told me she already knew the shape of what I was saying. Porcelain clinked somewhere on her end of the line. "Your father only wanted everything to be calm," she said carefully. "He didn't want a scandal. You'll understand when you're older." "I'm 30, I said. Another pause. then softer. He thought it was best. The call ended and the room around me tilted. Milo was at preschool coloring, blissfully unaware that his existence had been negotiated in boardroom language. I stared at the blank space where he usually stacked his toy cars and saw instead a conference table contract copies pens that never ran out of ink. A thought came with such clarity, it felt like a bell ringing. My son hadn't just been looked down on by this family. His arrival had been managed, contained, treated like an embarrassment to be moved off stage. And I, idiot that I was, had been funding the set pieces ever since. The house payments, the scholarships, the investments. I had been feeding the machine that labeled us both a stain. I sat at my desk and opened a new message to Nora. Prepare to shut down every single line of support after Thanksgiving. Mortgage assistance cease. Capital to Grayson's developments pull out. Scholarships end effective immediately after the holiday. I added a second instruction I had been resisting out of habit: open escrow for the Miami Beach property we looked at. Proceed with inspections. Treat it as a contingency, but move. I printed one more copy of the 2019 documents, slid them into a plain envelope, and tucked the envelope into the velvet slot of a Mont Blanc gift box. The absurdity of it made me laugh, once quiet, sharp, bitter. A token of respect cradling a blade. If my father insisted on talking about dignity, I would show him what it really cost. The next morning, Milo stood on his step stool in front of the mirror, and I straightened his little tie. Over his shoulder, the black Mont Blanc box rested on the dresser, a quiet punctuation mark in the glass. Big day, he asked. Maybe, I said. Whatever happens tonight, we leave with our heads up. I kissed the top of his head and told myself one last time, if they call us what they used to, I won't argue. I will simply open the door and walk my son out. We drove up the long, familiar drive just as the late afternoon light turned the sterling lawn the color of a magazine spread. The house glittered behind its columns, music drifting from somewhere near the terrace. Staff moved like chess pieces across the patio trays lifted shoulder high. I took the Mont Blanc box from the passenger seat and set it under my arm. Milo squeezed my fingers twice, his signal to say he was ready. Inside, Lila floated toward us all, silk and appraisal. Right on time, she said with a smile so tight it refused to soften. I'm impressed. No other plans tonight. I lowered my coat from Milo's shoulders and brushed a crumb from his lapel. Just this, I said. We wouldn't miss family. He slipped toward Ivy and Theo, who were sprawled on the carpet with a new gaming console. This is for 2 players, Ivy said without looking up. Sorry. Milo nodded polite and practiced and curled onto an armchair with his picture book. A heat rose in me that had nothing to do with the fireplace. The dining room was staged for theater. Walter's chair ruled the head of the table. Dorothy's place gleamed at the other end. Grayson and Lila occupied the power seats along the sides. My card sat near the kitchen door the way a restaurant might seat a last-minute party of one. Milo's name spelled correctly on the card, but placed under children's room, waited on a smaller console table that a staff member was preparing to wheel away. I'd like my son with me, I said evenly. Walter didn't look up from adjusting his cuff. Seating's set, he said. Then change it, I said. He sits beside me. Something in my voice must have landed because no one argued. A place setting appeared at my side and Milo slid into the chair, swinging his legs quietly. The room reclaimed its hum. Glasses lifted for toasts. Walter began with Grayson praising the aggressive positioning of his latest development deal. The table applauded. He moved to Lila, lauding her charity gala and the sterling name printed on step-and-repeat backdrops. More applause. He did not say my name. He did not say Milo's. My son glanced at me and then at Walter. What about me and my dad? He asked, voice small but clear. Oliver, Lila's husband, let out a quick laugh that failed to find friends. Some people have achievements, kiddo. Others have stability. He lifted his glass a fraction in my direction. And stability is something. Walter's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Zephyr has a steady job, he said, as if reading from a script. That's respectable. The last word sounded like it had splinters in it. I held Milo's hand under the table. We're proud of each other, I said to my son more than to anyone else. Conversation shifted to Grayson's deal. He basked in it, voice bright, until he said almost casually, "Couldn't have done it without a certain anonymous backer, though. Right place, right time." The room didn't notice the way my eyes found his. He avoided them, and for a heartbeat the noise dulled like a power dip in the walls. I took a sip of wine and let the silence inside me anchor everything back in place. If I spoke now, the evening would end in 30 seconds. I had promised myself to choose a cleaner exit. Across the table, Dorothy smoothed the skirt of her dress, eyes drifting toward me, and then away as if the air between us carried a warning. I couldn't decide if it was fear or shame that kept her gaze moving. My chest felt tight, a balancing act between an old ache and a new resolve. Dishes arrived, turkey carved into perfect medallions, greens that shone with butter. Staff whispered around us, clearing, refilling, resetting. For a while we performed our parts, forks lifting and falling, stories exchanged like currency. Then Milo's chair tilted forward as he reached for the roll basket. The knife beside his plate slid off the linen and hit the hardwood with a clap. It wasn't loud enough to matter, not really, but in that instant the room froze and turned toward him as if he'd yanked a fire alarm. Milo's cheeks went red. "I'm sorry," he said, voice small. "It's fine," I murmured, squeezing his knee. From the head of the table, Walter's hand tightened around his wine glass until his knuckles blanched. I watched the tendons jump in his wrist, watched the glass tilt almost imperceptibly. The sound in the room thinned again, like it was being pulled through a straw. "I've got it," I said, bending to retrieve the knife, placing it back on the linen, steady as a stone. No one breathed. Somewhere beyond the door, a service bell chimed. The second hand on the mantel clock clicked once and felt too loud. I looked up and met my father's eyes. There was an old storm gathering in them, the kind that had weathered our family for generations. I felt Milo's shoulder against mine, solid and warm. The glass creaked in Walter's grip. I could see it the moment just before a crack appears. The turkey had just been carved, its fragrance rich, but doing nothing to ease the tension sitting heavy in the room. Conversation had dulled to perfunctory exchanges, each sentence carrying a weight I could feel in my chest. Milo shifted beside me, picking at his beans with quiet focus. Ivy leaned toward Theo, whispering something that made them both giggle. Then loud enough for the table to hear, Theo smirked. "Some kids just don't know how to behave," he said, looking directly at Milo. Ivy chimed in, her voice laced with practiced superiority. "Yeah, it's obvious who doesn't belong here." Milo's fork paused midair. His lips pressed tight, eyes flicking to me. I touched his shoulder gently. "Eat your dinner," I murmured. "Don't let them decide who you are." He nodded and took another bite, though his cheeks glowed with embarrassment. I forced my own expression calm, though my pulse beat hard enough to sting. The next moment erupted out of nowhere. Theo jumped up, racing around the table despite his mother's half-hearted "sit-down, sweetheart." His sleeve brushed the tall crystal vase that had stood in the center of the Sterling dining table for as long as I could remember. The vase tipped, wobbled, then hit the hardwood with a crash that silenced the room. Shards spread like ice across the rug. Gasps circled the table. Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. Lila snapped instantly, voice sharp. "Milo, what did you do?" Milo jerked upright, eyes wide. "It wasn't me, I was sitting here." His voice broke. His small palms lifted helplessly in the air. I had seen it clearly, the vase struck by Theo's arm as he darted past, but Lila's tone left no room for doubt. She wanted the blame shifted. She wanted my son humiliated. Walter rose his chair, scraping like a blade against stone. His stare drilled into Milo, and the air seemed to close in around us. "This child," he said, voice thunderous, "is a disgrace. Exactly like his father. No discipline. No value." Milo flinched as if struck. I tightened my grip on his shoulder, willing myself not to explode. My insides burned. For years I had endured half-spoken insults, but aimed at my boy it was something else entirely. Walter's finger stabbed the air at me. "You," he roared, "are the shame of this family." A single father in a crumbling house dragging along this useless child. Get out of my home. Right now. The words family disgrace rang like iron, and for a moment the only sound was Milo's sobs as he clutched my shirt. Every face at the table turned away, not one willing to contradict him. I looked down at my son, then back at the man who had chosen contempt over love. My voice, when it came, was steady. "All right," I said. No shouting, no argument. Just calm, deliberate resolve. I rose, drawing Milo to his feet beside me. "Family is not a stage where reputation outshines care," I said clearly enough for each of them to hear. "From this moment forward, you hold no right to define us." I guided Milo toward the door. The scrape of chairs and whispers followed, but no one dared stop me. At the threshold, I turned back once. The Mont Blanc box rested under my arm. I placed it squarely in front of Walter's plate. The black lacquer gleamed under the chandelier. "You call me the disgrace," I told him. "Then look closely and see who has really lived on borrowed power." I didn't open the envelope hidden inside. I didn't need to. Its weight was enough to shift the room into silence. With Milo's hand in mine, I stepped into the cold night air, leaving the warmth and rot of that house behind. As we walked down the steps, Milo buried his wet face against me. I pressed a kiss into his hair. "It's over," I whispered. "We're free." Behind us, the heavy doors closed. I could feel it, a fracture opening inside that house, one that no holiday would mend. The highway had blurred into darkness as we drove south through the night, Milo asleep against the window. By the time the sky softened into pale blue, the Atlantic stretched wide before us. The villa stood at the edge of Miami Beach, its walls of glass catching the dawn. The infinity pool glistened, spilling toward the horizon, as though the ocean itself was ours. I carried Milo inside. He stirred awake, eyes widening at the open view of water. "Dad," he whispered, breaking into a smile. "It looks like the sky fell into the sea." I laughed softly, brushing his hair back. "This is where we belong now." After breakfast on the balcony, I opened my laptop. Nora's number glowed on the screen. And every channel of support, I told her. The mortgage assistance finished. Pull all our capital from Grayson's developments. Cancel the scholarships. Today. Her voice didn't waver. Understood. Effective immediately. Milo was on the terrace, holding his arms wide to the breeze. He shouted over the surf, "It smells like freedom." His joy filled me with a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. The first calls began before noon. I ignored the first three, but when Dorothy's voice filled my voicemail, I listened. "Zephyr, the bank just contacted us. There's been a disruption with the house note. What happened? Please call me back." I set the phone down without replying. My thoughts were calm, almost serene. Let them feel the ground shift. Let them realize whose hands had been holding up their world all this time. That afternoon, I drove Milo to the Wellington Arts Academy. The campus smelled of paint and new wood laughter echoing down the halls. In the studio, Ms. Harper knelt beside Milo as he blended colors across a canvas. "He has a rare sense for light," she told me quietly. "See how he balances the tones. That's not common at his age." Milo grinned when she patted his shoulder. His smile, bright, unguarded, brought tears I swallowed quickly. He was finally being seen for who he was, not scorned for who he wasn't. That evening, while Milo napped upstairs, I carried a box of books into our new study. On the porch, a man waved. He introduced himself as Mateo Cruz, a father raising his daughter on his own. "If you ever need help with childcare," he said, "I'm nearby." I found myself smiling back, surprised at the ease. "Thank you," I said. And I thought, here, fatherhood is not a mark of shame. It is a badge of endurance. The sun slid into the sea, leaving the house washed in quiet. I poured a glass of water and opened my inbox. At the top, an unread message pulsed. The subject line chilled me even before I clicked notice of foreclosure Sterling residence. I leaned back, exhaling slow. The house that had been their monument, their shrine to status, was now on the brink of collapse. I closed the laptop, listening to Milo's steady breathing upstairs. "So it begins," I whispered. "The empire that called us disgrace will learn what disgrace really is." The first week after I turned off the money felt like listening to a building creak before it finally gives. From Miami, the calls and messages came in waves, missed calls from my mother, texts from Lila that started polite and ended in fumes, voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize that belonged to lenders and lawyers who had learned my name the quiet way. The ocean outside our windows kept breathing in and out as if to remind me there was a world beyond the noise. Grayson called early on Tuesday. No greeting, just his breath sawing in my ear. The anonymous investor pulled out, he said. My sights are frozen. Crews walked off this morning. There are picket signs outside my office. In the background, someone pounded on a door. He lowered his voice. You have to come through for me, Z. Just until I refinance. I stepped onto the balcony where the wind could steady me. You're going to have to figure it out, I said. I'm not a shadow propping you up anymore. There was a long stretch of silence and then a cracked laugh. You can't do this to me. I already did, I said, and ended the call. My hands were steady when I set the phone down. A lifetime of being the overlooked son had taught me to doubt the firmness of my own decisions. Not this time. My brother had been lifted by invisible hands for years. He would learn what it meant to stand. By noon, a string of texts from Lila scrolled across my screen, the punctuation growing sharper with each bubble. At first she wanted to chat, then she demanded clarity, and finally she snapped the scholarships were pulled. Ivy and Theo are being pushed into public school. Do you understand what you've done? You've ruined their future. I typed and erased 3 replies before sending, their future isn't defined by my bank account. It's defined by your love and what you teach them about being decent. I stared at the message a moment before hitting send. She replied with a single word I had seen before from her unbelievable, which said more about the walls she lived behind than about me. That evening my mother called. When I answered, I could hear how thin she'd become just from the way she spoke my name. The house, she said, and her voice tripped, they've filed. Is it true, Zephyr? Was it you covering it all these years? I didn't speak at first. The ocean hissed softly along the sand. You know the answer, I said. And you know what you let him say to me in front of Milo. There was a muffled sound, not quite a sob, not quite a defense. She whispered, I thought I was keeping the family together. By pretending I wasn't in it, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The truth did its own work. My father waited until the end of the week to call, as if letting everyone else test the fence before he pushed through. You think pulling funds knocks me down, he barked the moment I said hello. Sterlings don't fall. I looked out at the last pale strike of sun across the water and felt strangely light. We never stood, I said. We leaned. On me. A breath hissed through his teeth. Ungrateful, I hung up. The old reflex to apologize flickered and died. When I set the phone on the counter, the kitchen felt brighter. That night, Milo and I sat in the sand behind the house. He packed wet grains into a bucket and flipped it to build a tower. Look, he said, crowning it with a small shell he'd found. I put my arm around him. The air was warm, the sky orange and soft as a peach. We're out, I told him, really out. A wide wave rolled in and licked the edges of his castle, tugging at the base until the walls slumped. He watched without fear. I can build it again, he said simply. I watched the foam curl back and thought of the carpeted dining room up north, the broken vase, the way everyone stared at my child as if the sound of a dropped knife proved anything at all. We will, I said. But there's still more to finish. The surf pulled the last of the sand flat, and the beach became a clean page. They asked for a meeting in New York the first week of December. My mother insisted it was just the 4 of us, no lawyers, no outsiders. I agreed, not because I believed in the sanctuary of family, but because I was done whispering through doors. The conference room at the hotel was a box of light and polished wood, the kind of place where deals are made to look inevitable. Walter stood by the window, jaw set, arms folded like a statue you couldn't tip. Grayson hovered near the coffee urn, not touching it. Lila sat with a tablet and a pen she wasn't writing with. My mother smoothed the edge of the tablecloth until the crease disappeared. You wanted me here, I said, taking the chair opposite my father. Here I am. We're in a bind, Grayson said too quick. Short term. Liquidity squeeze. If you stop, I said, and opened the Mont Blanc box. The weight of it calmed me. I took out the envelope, unsealed it, and slid the stack of papers until they rested between Walter and my mother. This is why I came. My voice didn't rise. In 2019, funds were routed through Hudson Ascot Partners into the family trust to pay for a relocation and a non-disclosure agreement. The beneficiary listed is W. Sterling. I met my father's eyes. You bought the disappearance of the woman who carried my son. You bought silence, and then you called me a stain. The room went empty of sound. Even the hallway hush outside the door seemed to pull back. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God, Walter. The words escaped her as if she hadn't meant them to become air. Grayson stared at the pages like they might be written in a language he could refuse to learn. You kept this from us, he said to my father, but the accusation lacked heat. It was the tone of a man who had just learned the floor was wood, not stone. Lila looked at me, not down at the paper, and for the first time there was no sneer in her gaze. Just shock and something approaching humility. Is this true? She asked my father, and her voice softened around the last word. Walter pushed back his chair so hard it scraped across the carpet. He planted his hands on the table and leaned forward. I did what I had to do, he said. I protected this family's name. I stood. You traded the only thing that could have honored our name, honesty, for the appearance of it. You turned love into a liability, then asked all of us to applaud. He opened his mouth. No words came. A grayness crossed his face like a cloud. His hand went to his chest. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then my mother cried out, and Grayson lunged to help, and Lila fumbled for her phone. I was already dialing emergency. My father sank back into the chair, breath short and ragged, a man finally facing the limits of the body he'd commanded like a soldier. While we waited, the room shifted into that narrow focus where every detail sharpens. The hum of the air vent, the thinness of my mother's fingers gripping the back of a chair, the way my father's cufflinks were slightly misaligned. I spoke because the silence had been the real disease. Listen, I said. This is what's going to happen. The money is gone. It isn't coming back. Not for the house, not for projects, not for tuition. If this family stands, it will be because each of you finally learns how. My mother blinked hard. I turned to her first. You have a choice. You can keep holding the world together with appearances, or you can tell the truth and build something smaller and real. To Grayson and Lila, I said, if you want a future, try walking toward it without using my back as a bridge. The siren outside grew louder, then vanished as the elevator swallowed it. Paramedics filled the doorway, crisp and efficient, a different kind of authority than the one that had ruled our dinners. They lifted Walter onto a stretcher. He looked past all of us, not proud, not furious, just thin, as if some part of him had been taken that he didn't know how to ask for back. In the corridor, the wheels whispered over the carpet. My mother hurried after them. Grayson stood, useless hands hovering. Lila's tablet slipped into her bag with a soft click. I didn't follow. I called Nora to let her know where I was. Then I called the school in Miami to confirm I'd pick Milo up from art club myself. When I hung up, the room was empty except for the papers on the table and the chair my father had left warm. Back in Miami that night, Milo ran to me with paint on his fingers. We made ocean colors, he said, grinning. I lifted him, breathing in the clean acrylic smell of his day. How did it go, I asked. I mixed the dark blues with a little white, he said proudly, so the waves looked like they were breathing. I held him close. That's exactly what they do, I said. After I tucked him in, I stood on the balcony and watched the Atlantic move in the moonlight, steady and relentless and honest. I thought of that conference room, the envelope open like a window. The stunned faces of people who had built a life on pretending consequences were for other families. I had spent years trying to be small enough to fit their image of me, then spent a fortune proving I didn't need their image at all. Son, I whispered into the night, this is what truth looks like. It knocks down what cannot stand. I looked over my shoulder toward his room where the soft nightlight painted a small square on the hall floor. I had once believed I was a shadow in my own life. Not anymore. I was the hand on the dimmer, the one turning it up until every corner showed what it really held. A week after Walter's mild heart attack, Miami's brightness felt out of place. The protagonist hoped truth would heal the Sterling family, but it only exposed their cracks. Days split between beach walks and hospital calls. Walter in a private room, Dorothy disheveled, Grayson and Lila bickering, and their mother admitting, "All we have is a broken family." Walter called voice weak, claiming he protected their name. "You lost it by hiding the truth," the protagonist replied, cutting all financial ties, no more mortgage help, no scholarships. Lila feared shame. The protagonist wanted authenticity. Grayson confessed he never wanted real estate, only Walter's approval. "Make your own life," the protagonist urged, ending old ties. They signed papers for the Bright Future Foundation, supporting single parents in tech feeling unburdened. At Milo's art show, his painting of them on a beach titled "My Family, My Hero" moved the protagonist. "We don't need the old house," they told Milo, embracing a new permanent life as the ocean hummed. By summer 2026, Miami was home. The villa buzzed with neighbors, kids, and barbecues. Milo's art appeared in local shows, and he stood taller among friends. The protagonist savored a simple, unwatched life. Dorothy visited, bringing paints for Milo and admitting, "You don't have to be anyone else to be my son." They invited her to dinner, a small but real step. A card from Walter offered brief civility, a quiet shift. On the beach, Milo built a sandcastle, its towers holding against waves. "Higher is good, stronger is better," the protagonist said, reinforcing it. Neighbors laughed, the grill sizzled, and the sea breathed steadily. Family became Milo's head on their shoulder, a glowing kitchen and art that told the truth. A wave tested the castle. It held. Milo cheered, and the protagonist saw their small, complete world defined not by lineage but by love and resilience.